Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Texas gubernatorial election. We talked about Texas a little bit in yesterday's video in regards to the Republican primary there, but today we're going to talk about it in the general election sense, as it's the first state to be holding its primaries, which are going to be next month in March. So I thought I'd do a brief early outlook on the Texas governor's race. So, of course, this race is going to be against Greg Abbott, the presumptive Republican nominee and two-term incumbent governor, versus his likely Democratic opponent, Beto O'Rourke, which there isn't really much competition in this primary. He's, the latest poll polling at somewhere around 90%. So again, it was pretty obvious that Beto was going to be the Democratic nominee from early on as soon as he announced his campaign. He has the most name recognition and was the nominee back in the 2018 Senate election, which we'll take a look at briefly. Where he exceeded expectations. He only lost to Ted Cruz by a little under 3 percentage points. He was able to win counties such as Tarrant County, Williamson, and Travis County, Hayes County. These are counties that hadn't gone blue in decades, so these really were Republican suburban strongholds outside of Austin and Dallas. Now, this really was probably one of the most, shocking results of the 2018, election night. Nobody really thought Texas was going to be this close. So Beto O'Rourke was that unique Democratic candidate who was able to bring the margin down significantly to the point where this race, nearly went to a toss-up, tilt sort of margin, which in Texas is really surprising. Now, going back to, of course, our gubernatorial map, in past videos, I've put Texas as a likely Republican state. In my latest one, I put it as a safe Republican state. I really want to take a look at why that is. Of course, I want to go to the polling first that we have here out of the state of Texas. Currently, as of mid-February 2020, Greg Abbott is leading Beto O'Rourke by around 10 points or so. Now, in the latest poll has them at 45-40. Obviously, polls this early don't mean a whole lot, one way or the other, whether Beto O'Rourke was doing better. Of course, if Beto O'Rourke was leading this early on, that would be a little concerning for Abbott, which would indicate a pretty close race. But so far, all but one poll, Abbott is ahead, and he's usually ahead by a fairly comfortable margin. There's this one poll where he's only ahead by one, but for the most part, he has a substantially solid lead over his Democratic opponent. Now, again, Beto O'Rourke, this is going to be his third, major political campaign for any statewide or federal office. Of course, he ran, again, like we said, in 2018 against Greg Abbott, against Ted Cruz in the Senate race. He ran for president back in 2020 and got, essentially no votes. He got one vote, because he dropped out so early in the race. So when he ran in Texas, he mostly focused on, issues like corruption and things like that for his Senate campaign, the failings of Ted Cruz, and in some case, even exploiting Ted Cruz's weaknesses with the Republican base. I think he aired a video where, he was talking about how Ted Cruz was bashing Trump or something like that, and then how he flip-flopped on that. So he tried to depress Republican turnout for Ted Cruz in that sense. This time around, obviously, when he ran for president, he went, I think hard left on a lot of issues, particularly guns, which almost no other Democratic went to that, extreme left position as Beto O'Rourke did on the issue of guns. Certainly that is going to hurt him in his Texas gubernatorial race, particularly since 2022 is expected to be a year where Republicans are favored by default. The national environment is going to be higher Republican turnout than usual. If we go back to the 2020 election, the Republicans still got 52.1% of the vote. They still won Texas despite the nation as a whole voting for Joe Biden by around 5 points. Trump won the state by around 5 points. So that puts, Texas in almost an R+10 kind of a state. And it doesn't bode well for Beto O'Rourke going out of the gates. Now, the one thing Beto O'Rourke has been campaigning very hard on is, of course, the Texas power failures that happened early last year, trying to pin Greg Abbott's administration on the failings, the slow government response, the poor planning for the disaster. and the ongoing relief, as not everyone is fully recovered from the damages, because a lot of people had burst pipes and caved in roofs and things like that. So there was a lot of stuff still going on down in the state of Texas. Now, the polls being the polls right now, Greg Abbott's in a strong position to win re-election. I certainly think that as time goes on, he's probably going to expand his lead most likely. But I am curious to see where the suburbs vote in this election, where the suburbs vote as opposed to the Rio Grande Valley. Because in 2020, we saw a massive shift in the Rio Grande Valley. Some counties going 40 points, 55 more, points more Republican. And, in the suburbs, we saw not as dramatic of a shift, but a pretty significant shift to the left toward the Democrats. Places like Dallas, Denton, Collin County, all these areas, the suburbs around Austin, which have been growing, at an alarming rate. Well, not alarming, but at a really, really fast rate. A lot of, San Francisco migrants who, normally work in the tech center have been settling in Austin. Austin's been, Texas' sort of liberal bastion for decades now, attracting a lot of, young college students who can't really afford to live out in places like California, so they tend to move to Texas where they can get, more affordable living and a better job. But Greg Abbott is a strong incumbent. In 2018, he defied the blue wave that happened in the rest of the country and in his home state of Texas. Ted Cruz only won by around 3 points or so. We can compare that, of course, to Greg Abbott, who won his race by over 13 points against his opponent, Lupe Valdez. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. Besides Greg Abbott's popularity, Lupe Valdez was poorly funded. She didn't really have a very exciting campaign when compared to Beto. Beto would have, these big rallies, very crowded rallies and stuff with lots of young people in them. Lupe Valdez did not generate the same excitement. Greg Abbott had a very strong performance in the suburbs compared to Ted Cruz. He was able to win 58, 59 in Denton County. Again, these are still low margins compared to the 2012 election where Romney was getting 66% in basically both these counties. But it was still impressive for the state as a whole, given the national environment. Of course, he won Fort Worth County by 11 points. We can compare that to Ted Cruz, who lost Fort Worth County by a couple thousand votes, and he came pretty close to losing Collin and Denton County by around 8 and 6 points respectively. 5 points respectively in that sense. So Greg Abbott has a much stronger advantage in the suburbs than somebody like Ted Cruz does. Obviously, I think some of the Texas electorate probably have soured on Beto O'Rourke since his previous failed campaigns. While he is probably the only big name Democrat from Texas at the moment, maybe they could have run, Julian Castro or something. Not that he would have won the race or anything, but he really is the only big name that has thrown his hat into the race. Hence why when we look at the primary polling, these other candidates aren't even making it on the board. They've got, 1 to 6% at most. So Beto O'Rourke is certainly going to be the nominee. And he's been focusing a lot on, like I said, the power failures, Abbott as a whole being a, conservative Republican. Now, I don't really think that ad campaign is going to work in a place like Texas, which is still a conservative Republican state, even if the GOP is slipping in its margins. And again, a lot of that could be contributed, or some of it rather, could be contributed to Donald Trump as a person, Donald Trump himself. We saw Donald Trump only get 52% of the vote in Texas in the 2020 election. But if we go to John Cornyn, he did like 1.5 points better, if not almost 2 points better. So 1.6%, it's a decent improvement. And, he was able to win Fort Worth by, around 4 points and able to do a lot better in places like Collin and Denton. So, while it could have just been the down ballot effect, I certainly think some of the some of the blue gains that have been happening in Texas can be attributed purely to just Trump. But some of it is due to long-term demographic change and just a souring of the suburban electorate on Republicans, not just due to Trump, but the fact that they're moving more left because of this. So Abbott certainly has the advantage in this state just by not being Trump. Again, Trump has kind of been out of the national picture for about 2 years, give or take. So, like a year and a half. He's been out of the national picture for a year and a half. As we saw in Virginia and New Jersey, tying Republicans to Donald Trump doesn't really work anymore, and especially won't work in a state that Donald Trump still won by over 5 points. So, just because there's some Texans that probably won't vote for Greg Abbott, let's say, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to vote for Beto O'Rourke. They might just vote third party in this election. But, based on this analysis, like I said, Greg Abbott performing exceptionally well in the 2018 election, despite all the other statewide candidates barely holding on to their seats. Again, we can look at Ted Cruz. We can look at others. This map right here, the precinct map, really illustrates how dark red the southern part of Texas got. And I really want to see how the Hispanic electorate is actually going to vote in the 2020 elections in Texas, if they're going to move more to the right, because Greg Abbott back in 2018 cracked 40% with Latino voters. I believe both, I think at least men, but men he might have gotten like 44%, because I think the overall average for Latinos was 40%. So he did very well with Hispanics. He'll need to do well since Texas has a huge portion of Hispanic voters, many of which lean more conservative than your average Hispanic from New York or Rhode Island or something like that. But it will be interesting to see if this national trend of Latino voters moving more to the right actually does continue. So overall, I think this is, as of right now, as I've done in my last gubernatorial prediction, I think this is probably going to be a safe margin for Abbott. I don't really see him doing worse than he did in 2018, just given the national environment. Even though Beto O'Rourke is a stronger name, I think people are going to grow tired of him. I think it's going to be sort of a Wendy Davis situation, when Wendy Davis, if we go back to 2014, she made a name for herself by opposing a Texas abortion bill that was being passed in the state government. She had a lot of momentum early on, especially by liberal activists and stuff like that, and she wasn't polling that. I mean, she was polling around where Beto O'Rourke is polling now. Early on, she had it's hard to say momentum, but she had she had better poll numbers. As of course time went on, the electorate soured on her more or less, and Greg Abbott massively overperformed his polling in some instances. Some of these polls, Greg Abbott's only ahead by 11 points, and Greg Abbott ended up winning this gubernatorial election by over 20 percentage points. So do I think that Greg Abbott's going to beat Beto O'Rourke by 20 points? I don't think so. I think Texas is a bluer state than it was in 2014. In 2012, you had Mitt Romney almost win Harris County, which is home to Houston. If we look at Harris County in the 2018 election results, if we just take a look at what Beto did, Beto was able to get 58% in Tarrant County, and in Harris County, and Trump, by comparison, only got around 42%. So Joe Biden getting around 56% in Tarrant County. So, the urban areas of Texas really have shifted, but I do think this is Greg Abbott's race to lose. As of right now, I think Greg Abbott probably will win this race by around 12 points or higher, just given the national environment, Beto O'Rourke as a candidate, and his popularity has kind of bounced back since those winter storms back in the early winter of last year. So anyway, guys, thank you all for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed. Hit the subscribe button if you are new. Like this video down below if you enjoyed. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.